Tobruk's breakout was the moment when Operation Crusader stopped being only an advance from the Egyptian frontier and became a battle fought from both sides of the siege line. For months, the garrison had endured isolation inside the perimeter, while German and Italian forces contained the port and watched the approaches. The British and Commonwealth Army outside was now pushing westward through the desert, but relief could not be completed by movement alone. The defenders inside Tobruk had to punch outward at the right time, toward a relieving force that was itself fighting through confusion. This was the drama of timing, distance, and uncertainty, two friendly forces trying to find each other in a battlefield where nothing stayed still.
The garrison at Tobruk was under Major General Ronald Scobie, a British commander responsible for holding a fortress that was both symbol and military asset. By November of 1941, the defense included British troops of the 70th Infantry Division, Polish and Czechoslovak elements, tank support, artillery, engineers, and other troops needed to keep the perimeter alive. The Australian role in the long siege had already become famous, though much of the original Australian garrison had been relieved before Crusader's decisive phase. What mattered for the breakout was that Tobruk was not a passive island. It contained organized combat power, and that power had to be released outward if the siege was to be broken. The problem was that a breakout is one of the hardest operations to coordinate. The garrison had to attack from a known perimeter against enemy positions that had been built and improved over time. Those positions included wire, mines, anti-tank guns, infantry posts, artillery, and observation points. At the same time, the relief force outside had to come close enough for the breakout to matter. If the garrison attacked too soon, it might be stopped and weakened before help arrived. If it attacked too late, the outside force might be defeated or driven away. The timing had to be close, but the desert made close timing extremely difficult. The Axis siege line around Tobruk was not a single thin ring that could be snapped by one blow. It was a system of positions, guns, patrol areas, tracks, and reserves designed to contain the defenders and prevent them from interfering with Rommel's wider campaign. Italian formations held important parts of the siege front, and German forces provided mobile strength and tactical flexibility nearby. The defenders inside Tobruk therefore had to break through more than a line on a map. They had to carve a corridor through prepared resistance, keep that corridor open, and push far enough outward to connect with forces moving in from the southeast. Every yard gained had to be protected against counterattack. For armored warfare, the Tobruk breakout is important because it shows that tanks could support a siege rupture, but they could not make one simple. The garrison used armor to help infantry attack through defended positions, but tanks inside a breakout faced special dangers. They had to move through gaps in obstacles, avoid mines, and support infantry at a pace that did not leave either arm isolated. Infantry needed the tank's firepower in shock, while tanks needed infantry to clear close threats, hold ground, and protect against enemy anti-tank teams and guns. This was not the sweeping desert maneuver often associated with Crusader. It was close, deliberate, dangerous combined arms fighting from inside a fortress. The men attacking out of Tobruk were moving from a place they knew into ground the enemy had watched for months. That made the psychological shape of the action very different from an armored column moving across the open desert. The defenders had lived under siege, but the perimeter had also become familiar. Beyond it lay minefields, posts, and enemy fire. A breakout demanded a sudden shift from endurance to attack, from holding to advancing. Artillery had to support the assault. Engineers had to open or mark routes. Infantry had to seize positions, and tanks had to push forward without becoming separated. It was a planned act of violence under conditions where confusion could begin almost immediately. Outside Tobruk, the relief force faced its own confusion. British armored units and Commonwealth infantry were fighting around Sidi Rezegh, El Adem, and the surrounding ridges and tracks. The plan required them to move toward Tobruk
while also dealing with Rommel's mobile forces and Axis counterattacks. That meant the troops inside the fortress were not breaking out toward a calm and steady rescue column. They were reaching toward a battlefield already in motion, where formations were being delayed, redirected, damaged, and sometimes misunderstood by their own headquarters. The garrison might hear that relief was near, but near in the desert could still mean miles of contested ground and hours of danger. The breakout also reveals why communication was one of the decisive problems of Operation Crusader. Headquarters could order a link-up, but the men on the ground had to create it through dust, fire, and imperfect reports. A unit might be told that friendly forces were advancing from a certain direction, only to find that the situation had changed by the time the message arrived. Radio contact could fail, signals could be misunderstood, and local commanders could be forced to act on fragments. In a mobile battle, a gap between information and reality can become fatal. Tobruk's breakout depended on turning scattered movements into physical contact, and physical contact was much harder than drawing arrows toward one another. The terrain south and southeast of Tobruk made the task even more demanding. The ground was not a featureless table, even if maps sometimes made it appear that way. There were ridges, shallow depressions, tracks, and localities that affected observation and fire. Places such as Ed Duda and Bel Hamed mattered because they helped control approaches and lines of sight. A force holding such ground could see movement, direct fire, and block a corridor. A force attacking toward them had to deal with more than distance. It had to deal with the enemy's ability to use the ground as a weapon, turning modest rises and defended points into obstacles to relief. The breakout's early efforts produced gains, but not the instant release that hope might imagine. This is one of the most important truths in the story of Tobruk. A siege does not end the moment defenders attack outward, and a relief operation does not succeed the moment outside troops move in the right direction. The two movements must meet, survive contact with the enemy, and keep a route open long enough for supplies, units, and command arrangements to follow. That is why the fighting around Tobruk felt so tense. Every report of progress came with the question of whether the progress was real, connected, and sustainable. Rommel's forces understood the danger. If Tobruk's garrison broke out and joined the relieving army, the siege position would be compromised, and Axis forces around the fortress could be placed under pressure from multiple directions. The Axis response, therefore, aimed not simply to stop one attack, but to prevent a corridor from becoming permanent. Counterattacks, artillery fire, anti-tank defenses, and local resistance all worked to keep the garrison and relief force separated or to close any gap that opened. In this sense, the breakout was not one dramatic door bursting open. It was a struggle over whether a door could be forced, widened, and kept from slamming shut again. For the defenders inside Tobruk, the breakout carried emotional weight, but it was not romantic. Men who had endured siege conditions were now asked to advance into fire against prepared positions, knowing that success depended partly on forces they could not see and could not control. The relief force outside faced the matching pressure of knowing that failure would leave the garrison still isolated. This human burden matters because operational language can make the process sound mechanical. Breakout, link up, relieve the fortress. In reality, those words meant men crossing exposed ground, tanks burning or breaking down, engineers working under fire, and commanders trying to make decisions before the situation changed again. The episode also fits the larger evolution of armored warfare because it connects older and newer forms of battle. The breakout from Tobruk had something in common with earlier trench and siege warfare: fortified lines, obstacles, artillery preparation, and infantry assaults. Yet it was also part of a modern mobile campaign in which tanks, trucks, radios, airfields, and fast-moving armored formations shaped the outcome. Crusader was not purely a siege battle, and not purely a maneuver battle. It was both at once. Tobruk's breakout makes that clear, because the defenders had to break a fixed line, while the relieving force fought a mobile battle outside it. Tobruk Breaks Out is therefore a story of connection attempted under extreme uncertainty. The garrison's attack outward was necessary, courageous, and carefully planned, but it could not succeed by bravery alone. It needed the relief force to arrive, the corridor to hold, the enemy to be pushed back, and the entire operation to survive the chaos of a desert battle that was changing hour by hour. In the history of tank warfare, this moment matters because it reminds us that armored operations are not just about penetration or speed. They are about coordination across space, about linking separate forces at the right time, and about turning a temporary opening into a real operational result. At Tobruk, that task had begun, but the hardest fighting to make contact secure still lay ahead.